You have to eat some food from this world or else you'll disappear.
No!
So let me keep the introduction to this video as brief as possible. Once upon a time, I wrote an 80,000 word document analysing every scene, pretty much every moment of the film Spirited Away. After I started this channel, I began slowly converting it into much more refined, less rambling episodes analysing the film bit by bit. So I did one analysing the opening scene, the first about 2 minutes of the film, then one analysing the 2 to 7 minute mark, then the third one was up on my channel for about a day before Studio Ghibli weighed in and started copyright striking a lot of them. So then I tried uploading them all again on DTube, but DTube didn't really work and the videos didn't show up half the time and it caused a lot of trouble, so here's the plan now. I've basically waited for the copyright strike to expire. Now I'm uploading all 3 videos so far into one, this video, plus the extra 4th episode I've made recently. I fully expect Studio Ghibli to be bastards again and take this video down, so I advise you to download this video for yourself if you want to keep it. Other than that, like the video if you enjoy it, because I might only get a limited amount of time to see people's response to this, and if you want me to keep going with the series, let me know, you know? That's all I've got to say for now anyway though, so let's begin with the first episode, the first sequence of the film, and the very first shot. Here we go. So it opens with these dreamy piano notes playing and it fades in from black to show pink flowers and this very childlike card that Chihiro reads out as saying, "I miss you, Chihiro, from your best friend, Lily." Now opening shots to films are always important, especially with this one zoomed in so close. We are being told that this card, these flowers are deeply important to Chihiro, and of course they're deeply important. Immediately we can infer that Chihiro has moved house, moved away from wherever her best friend Lily lives, and if any of you ever moved house as a kid, you will know how heartbreaking it can be. Chihiro may never see her best friend Lily ever again, so of course the opening of this film is an extreme close-up on that card. Of course Chihiro is reading it out loud for probably the 100th time, that's how important it is to her. But then we hear her dad say, "Chihiro?" in the sort of tone you say to gently wake someone up, which is symbolically quite fitting. You know, Chihiro is lost in her dreamy thoughts of her best friend, which her dad wakes her up from. He drags her back to the sad reality. And that's exactly what we see visually as well, because these happy pink flowers get wrenched away from the camera. Behind the flowers we see Chihiro's feet up against the various boxes and bags, and then part of the car window behind them. "Chihiro, we're almost there," her dad adds, and we realise this is Chihiro still in the car en route to their new home. And we don't get much of a shot outside the window, which is interesting, only this small blurry space here. And I think that's because we're seeing from Chihiro's perspective. She's not interested in this new place at all, this new home. She's only interested in Lily, in the flowers, in her old life. That's what's important to her. Dad has said, "Chihiro, we're almost there," as though he's expecting her to be excited, but she's not excited. This glum shot of her face here confirms it. And there's some subtle information we can also draw from this frame here. Firstly, there's the fact Chihiro's alone in the back of the car. What should be a seat for a second person is taken up by boxes, stuff, inanimate objects. Chihiro has no travel companion, which cements how very lonely she must be feeling right now. Both her parents are in the front of the car looking forwards, looking out the windscreen, looking towards their new home and their new life before them. Chihiro, however, is completely on her own in the back, looking up at the ceiling or at the flowers. And I'll point this out now, there'll be tons of examples that show it throughout the opening of the film, but just pay attention to how ignored Chihiro constantly is by her parents. How little they stop to think what Chihiro must be feeling, or to consider her at all, really. But anyway, Mum says, "This really is in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to have to go to the next town to shop." And that's an interesting thing for her to say, because it raises the question, didn't you already know, Mum? You and Dad bought the house, didn't you go to see it already? Why didn't you know beforehand that it's in the middle of nowhere? And the obvious answer to that is that they've moved house in a bit of a hurry. This wasn't a planned decision where, as a family, they've spent a long time looking at new houses, finding the perfect one, any of that. Instead, they've just picked a new home in a hurry without knowing much about the surrounding area, which tells you they were forced to move for some reason or another. I mean, let's think about this. The opening shots were all clearly from Chihiro's perspective. We were made to think and feel like she does, aka, why do we have to move home? My parents never listened to me, I never wanted to move home, I wanted to stay in the old house near my friends, why does my dad have to wrench me away from a life where I was happy? But now the camera's shifted so that it isn't from Chihiro's perspective, and we learn maybe Dad didn't want to move, maybe it wasn't a case of not taking Chihiro's feelings into account, Maybe it was simply they didn't have the choice, they had to move. And then, seeing it that way, Chihiro can sulk as much as she likes, but there's nothing her parents could have done. They had to move. Sometimes life just is hard and unfair, a point that her dad then seems to express as he says, "We'll just have to learn to like it." And it's fitting actually because this comment is then followed by various attempts from both parents to convince themselves and to convince Chihiro that actually it's not so bad here. Dad even points out Chihiro's new school and Mum adds, "It doesn't look so bad." You know, they're both trying to put a positive spin on things, but Chihiro in response sits up, looks out the window for the first time and just sticks her tongue out at the new school. "Ah, Mum, my flowers are dying," Chihiro suddenly exclaims with much more emotion than I just did. When you consider that those flowers were a present from Lily, that bouquet and the card with it are kind of all she has left of Lily, you realise how wonderfully symbolic that is. The thing that symbolises Lily, the gift she gave me, is dying. And that's bloody sad, but it's also the reality. As Chihiro grows up, the flowers will at some point die, as she will slowly forget about Lily more and more. By the time she's 20, she might have half forgotten Lily altogether. And that's a horrible fear to have. What if these flowers die? What if I completely forget about Lily altogether? I'm going to lose this thing that feels so incredibly important to me. Her mum replies to this exclamation of fear from Chihiro without any sympathy or understanding whatsoever. She barely even looks round and just coldly points out, "I told you not to smother them like that." Chihiro then laments, "I finally get a bouquet and it's a goodbye present. That's depressing." And again her parents ignore the emotion behind what she's saying as Mum just answers, "Daddy bought you a rose for your birthday, don't you remember?" Then she hands Chihiro back her card and says, "Hold on to your card, I'm opening the window. And quit whining, it's fun to move to a new place, it's an adventure." So there's several useful things to draw from that line. Firstly, the idea of having to hold on tight to the card so that it doesn't get blown away in the wind as they drive onto their new life. There's an obvious metaphor there, a metaphor that will crop up throughout the rest of the film with the idea of having to remember your name, remember what your parents look like, all sorts. It's an idea of hold on tight to the things you care about, otherwise they'll get lost along the road of life. You know, life is so chaotic, things get in the way constantly, it's so easy to drift apart from the people you care about, to lose contact, to let your life get pulled passively along some track you never wanted. Chihiro will have to do a lot of holding on tight throughout this film. In fact, it's the love and care she does hold on tight to that will keep her safe, that will keep her able to survive and succeed throughout all the dangers she'll face ahead. There's also the comment, "It's fun to move to a new place, it's an adventure." And this is where it feels like things start. It's only as her mum says this that Chihiro then properly looks out the window for the first time. It's the first time we actually get a shot of the world outside the car, and it's also the moment the film title comes up. In this sense, the line is half talking to us as an audience, saying, "Get ready for an adventure." And we know from what we've seen so far that an adventure is certainly not what Chihiro wants at this moment in time. And I kind of want to keep this video going because really I haven't actually said much at all yet. This opening of the film has all been about the idea of moving home, how lonely and terrifying that feels for a kid. So maybe this analysis feels a little bit light so far. And I think that's not just because I've only been talking about the first 2 minutes, but it's also because all of this stuff we've talked about so far, for any of you that have seen the film, how little of it comes up again. I mean, that opening extreme close-up of the flowers and the card will have you thinking that they're deeply important throughout the course of this entire film. You'll probably be imagining that Lily keeps getting brought up, that Chihiro will keep talking about her old home, but she never does really. I mean, the card does briefly show up again later on in a moment where Chihiro does have to hold on tight, but you might not notice it on a first viewing. You might completely forget that Chihiro even had a friend called Lily. It might just go straight over your head. None of this opening bit feels particularly significant for the rest of the film. Why? And well, that's because the adventure takes over, and all of these things that feel important to Chihiro, deeply important, naturally get pushed to the back of her mind as she's faced with all these threats and dangers and struggles of other stuff, that she doesn't really have the time to think about Lily or any of these things. And that's true for growing up and coming into the adult world in general. Suddenly, all this stuff that mattered to you as kids, all this stuff that still feels important, kinda gets pushed to the back of your mind as you face the struggles of earning, trying to survive, and all these other difficulties that come with growing up. There is also the point that, alongside this need to hold on tight, there is also the need to move on. Now it is a contradiction because I guess that's the struggle with life. How much do you hold on to the past and how much do you let go of it and become somebody entirely new in the future? How much do you hold on to those old friends and how much do you forge new ones, forge a new life? The fact it is a contradiction shows why it's so hard to manage in our own lives as well, really, because how do you hold on to the past without becoming stuck in that past? And how do you move on without completely leaving everything behind, so much so that the past starts to feel alien to you? That's quite a big, broad question that the film will struggle with throughout, that Chihiro will struggle with until its conclusion. And maybe in that sense, finishing the video here, finishing with us kind of looking out across the horizon at the rest of this film before us, maybe that is a good place to finish. Now, unless I want each of these videos to be 5 hours long, I'm not going to have the time, nor will I keep your patience if I prattle on about the possible symbolic meaning behind every image shown in this film. But it is worth a short word on this old tree, with several of its branches dead. The camera pans down and we see that it's left out on its own, set apart from the rest of the woods behind it. If we wanted to, we could infer that means this forest has been cut back. The trees used to go out as far as this one, probably even further, but now they've been chopped down, and the only reason this tree has been spared, I imagine, is because of the Shinto shrine at the foot of it. Nature is being cut back, a theme that comes up in almost all of Miyazaki's films, and we see that straight away from this image. The broader point I'm leading to by bringing up this tree is about transitions. The last video ended with Chihiro's mum effectively making the point, get ready for an adventure, before the film titles came up. And now, after the film title, what we get is a slow sequence of multiple transitions that ultimately take Chihiro and her family from the world of reality into the world of fantasy, from urban life to nature, from mundane existence into the spirit world. The point is, it takes a long lot of transitions for them to reach it. They have to turn off the beaten track and lead a route through a forest that was once much larger than it currently is. The geography leads them to a place that's far away from the rest of the world, hidden, pretty much unknown, and that's because, like the forest has been cut back, so has our connection to the spiritual. Chihiro and her family don't easily stumble upon such a connection with the spirit world. It takes a long winding route of many crossing points with many metaphorical changes in the surroundings, so I guess that's largely what this video will focus on. That will be the spine of what I want to say. We're going to discuss the various transitions Chihiro and her family undergo on her way from here to the spirit world and what it all means. Welcome to my channel, welcome to my little thought tree where we're analysing more of the film Spirited Away. So Dan stops the car here because this transition, this path doesn't feel right. I mean, obviously they're trying to get to their house in a city, a dirt track leading into a forest isn't likely to be the right direction. And he says, "Wait, did I take the wrong turn? This can't be right." Followed by Mum pointing out, "Look, there's our house, it's that blue one on the end." So at this point they've obviously gone the wrong way and should turn back. And yet despite Dad acknowledging that I must have missed the turn off, he still decides without any logical reasoning that this road should get us there. Chihiro at this point is doing something interesting. She's looking at these little houses on the floor and showing curiosity about them. "What are those stones? They look like little houses," she says. And I'll come to this point about curiosity later, but for now there's something spiritual about the forest. Chihiro clocks that there is something spiritual about this forest. Mum anyway points out that Dad shouldn't try taking a shortcut because he always gets them lost, and he says, "Trust me, it's gonna work." You know, there's an arrogance to Dad that he just assumes he knows, even when he's clearly wrong. He just assumes this is the right track because that's what he thinks, therefore it's the truth. And Chihiro even points this out, saying, "Dad, I think we're lost," which he just shrugs off dismissively. "We're fine, I've got four-wheel drive." And personally, I see this whole bit about Dad as something to do with the arrogance of humanity. Here is a dense forest that Chihiro has noticed clearly has a spiritual presence, but Dad sees no issue in blundering in, charging forwards in a heavy car with a "I know what's best" mentality. I mean, that's human beings, isn't it? Disturb nature because we know what's best. Chop down a tree, trample over a forest, what does it matter? I've got four-wheel drive, therefore it's no problem to me. He's speeding so fast through what is a very thin dirt road that is actually pretty dangerous. It's always surprising how many ignorant people there are in the world that assume they know best and are 100% right about one thing or another, despite the fact they've taken literally no time to consider at all, what if there's a different way of seeing this, or what if I'm wrong? The road is bumpy, they smash through branches, boxes possibly filled with fragile belongings are being shaken about in the back. Chihiro cries out in fear, Mum calls for him to repeatedly slow down, but he doesn't. He's not paying any attention to them because he knows what's best. It's fine. I don't have to consider any other opinions because I know what's best. Until, of course, there is a dead end ahead. One that could have easily crashed the car, and Dad's only just about able to brake in time. Before I go any further though, let me drop back a few seconds to during this blind charge where Chihiro looks out the window again and notices what I think is a statue of Yubaba/Zeniba. Chihiro's not charging forwards, you know, she's considering things, she's noticing the surroundings. She has the sense that there's something spiritual about this forest. Maybe in her words she'd say, this place gives me the creeps, something about this gives me a bad feeling. But you know, she's had the curiosity or the openness to notice this bad feeling. And as we'll come to see, it's this bad feeling she has that will ultimately save her from eating food at the restaurant and turning into a pig alongside her parents. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself now. There's a dead end ahead, which is the same Yubaba/Zeniba statue that Chihiro just saw in the woods. The position of the statue makes it impossible for the car to go any further. They can't charge forwards at speed anymore. They have to proceed slower, more cautiously on foot. Having said that, I don't think the proceed with caution message really sinks in for Chihiro's family. I mean, let's point out the family's reaction to almost crashing headfirst into this statue. If I was driving the car, I'd probably be a bit shaken having come in close to collision, and you might expect Mum to throw a fit at him for his driving, you know, what the hell were you doing? Didn't you hear me telling you to slow down? You could have got us killed. None of that happens though. None of them react. Without missing a beat, the second the car has stopped, Dad pops his head out the window and we get a good long look at the building before them. Wow, what's this old building? That's all Mum says, no fit thrown or comment on his reckless driving. And Dad says, looks like an entrance, sounding excited to explore, and he just wanders off straight into the tunnel. This building isn't old, it's fake, says Dad, who again knows best. He's got his hand on his hip and seems to be implying there's nothing to fear at all with this place. And yet, after saying this, we get an eerie shot of the tunnel with eerie wind noises. We see leaves getting blown in inside, and Chihiro points out the wind is pulling us in. She's sensitive to the environment, where Dad has chalked it all down to, nah, it's a fake building. There's nothing strange or eerie about any of it, it's all just plaster. And Dad then suggests going in because he wants to see what's on the other side, but Chihiro is firm against this. She says, I'm not going, it gives me the creeps. And I'm not going to keep repeating myself over the next 10 minutes or so. There are countless examples of Dad ignoring the blindingly obvious because he's far too arrogant and sure of himself to pay any attention to the surroundings, whilst Chihiro does the opposite. I will say, however, that this doesn't necessarily mean I'm praising Chihiro for her sensitivity to the environment, her willingness to effectively listen to what the surroundings are telling her, because a lot can be made in this film about innocence. Where her parents are old and have lost their innocence, they turn greedy, too sure of themselves, too certain they know what's best, in the sort of way that the young and innocent never feel. Innocent kids are naturally always a bit wide-eyed and sensitive to the world. I mean, in a lot of art we constantly praise innocence as the high ideal, and yet we also contradict this by praising people who want to grow up, wanting to grow and expand beyond their innocence, hence a lot of coming-of-age stories and films like this one. Innocence isn't a high ideal. This is what I'm trying to say. It contains a lot of good qualities such as that wide-eyed sensitivity and the lack of arrogance, but the innocent are also very timid and shy and too unsure of themselves. I mean, this is one part of Chihiro's arc throughout this film. She turns from someone timid and unsure of herself into someone confident. The ideal isn't for us to remain forever innocent, despite how much art praises it and laments the fact we can't. The ideal is to grow into confident human beings, but to do that without sacrificing those good qualities of innocence, without losing our sensitivity, our curiosity, our openness, that's the key. To grow into someone more confident and aware and responsible without losing what made innocence good. Anyway, I don't want to keep repeating the same point with different examples, so I'm going to go through this next section a bit quicker. Chihiro firmly announces that she's not going to go through the tunnel because it scares her. Her parents, however, ditch her and head straight through the tunnel, leaving her standing alone next to a statue which also scares her, so either way Chihiro is faced with fear, a scary statue or a scary tunnel. So despite not wanting to, she decides to pick the scary tunnel because at least then she has her parents by her side. So we've had the transition off the main roads onto the dirt one, the transition into the forest, the transition out of the car and now through the tunnel. It opens out into an empty, what I think is a train station, but it might just be a generic waiting place. It's unclear. What it does have though is a slightly Western church feel to it, or something like a Roman mausoleum, which is interesting to say the least. And since we're talking about transitions, let's look at this station as an in-between space, between the dark of the tunnel and the light of the outside, between the world of the forest and this eerie world of spirits. It's an uncertain waiting point. The light of this stained glass window just misses the water fountain, a broken water fountain, as you can see from it leaking out the bottom into that puddle there. I'm just going to say it's a fantastic image, and I wanted to leave its symbolism open, and that like all the images in this in-between space, they're all very ambiguous and very uncertain, and ultimately I think that's the message of this space. It's an uncertain place between two other things. As they walk along, Chihiro keeps looking back behind at the tunnel they've passed through, and you can sense she gets the feeling they're leaving something behind right now. Considering everything I've said in the first video though, it is fitting that she's the one to be looking back where her parents are looking forwards. They come out of the in-between space into the light. The sky is large and blue, and the fields are vast and empty apart from these old statues so weathered that you could easily mistake them for simple rocks, and this doorless house. And Dad, the one who's too sure of himself, announces, "I knew it, it's an abandoned theme park. You know, never mind all this eerie shit Chihiro is picking up on, it's nothing more than an abandoned theme park." Okay, so 2 final points, then I'll wrap this up. 1. Dad's motive for coming here was for a quick look to see the place. He just wanted to see what's on the other side of the tunnel, which Chihiro then even points out by saying, "Where are you going? You said just a quick look." He wanted to see what this place was, and now he's confirmed it in his mind. It's an abandoned theme park, so job done, Dad. You could go back now, and yet he doesn't. Why? Well, he and Mum are now driven on by a different motivation. Mum now alludes to it being a beautiful setting. Ah, what a beautiful place, we should have brought our lunch, then we could have had a picnic. Their motivation now is they simply want to bask in the beautiful setting. And obviously the mention of a picnic leads just a few seconds later to Dad catching the scent of cooked food. So the 2 motives they now have for carrying on their journey are hunger and the want to enjoy the setting. And I suppose you could chalk both those things down as greed, or desire. We're arrogant, self-assured humans who have the right to enjoy and trample over whatever the hell we want. And we smell food, therefore we're going to assume we can have some of it. And my final point, Chihiro calls for them to turn back. She looks as though she herself might turn back at this point, however a sharp gust of wind from the station forces her onwards. Out of fear again, she's forced onwards. She fears being left behind by the parents she so depends on, and she says to her mum, "Did you hear that building? It was moaning." This is her sensitivity at work. She's now no longer just picking up an eerie feel to the place, but she actually senses there's an emotion to the environment. There's a sadness in the moaning. The building is sad. Her mum dismisses this however as, "It's just the wind," which in the real world would probably be true, but this is the spirit world, Sonny.
You best start believing in ghost stories, Miss Turner. You're in one.
Welcome to part 3 of me pretty much attempting to analyse the entirety of Spirited Away. We left off 7 minutes into the film last time, and today we're starting with the theme park that Chihiro and her parents have just entered by crossing the dried up river. And the first question I ask myself when I see this setting is, why a theme park? I mean, there's no reason intrinsic to the plot for it to be a theme park so long as it was somewhere abandoned that there could be a bathhouse. Accepting that, the setting could have been anything, so why a theme park? Well, theme parks are places meant specifically for big, happy crowds of people. You know, they're full of vibrant life, so seeing an abandoned theme park feels like an absence of life. If you've ever been to one, they do feel incredibly eerie and lifeless without anyone there. I think that's because they're so at odds with the very thing they were meant for. Abandoned theme parks have a very graveyard-like quality to them for this reason, which is fitting considering Chihiro and her parents have effectively now crossed over death and into the spirit world by this point. What also stands out about theme parks though is that they're 100% fake. They're a kind of manufactured reality. And this makes sense if we consider the context of the last video I did. In that, if you saw it, I talked about the arrogance of humans to just trample over nature and Earth like they rule it, like it belongs to us. And so we build all sorts of wonderful structures and places like theme parks that people flock to, but then time passes. All these monuments we build come to mean very little at all. Not only has nature slowly taken over again with these statues obscured by moss, plants growing out of the paths, all that kind of thing, and the fact this place meant for humans is now literally owned and controlled by spirits, but also just how time reveals all these glamorous things to be fake because no one cares about this place anymore. Ultimately, it was unimportant. It stood for nothing. And it makes me think of the endlessly quoted poem by Percy Shelley, Ozymandias, in which a traveller talks about this ancient ruin of a statue that crumbled and has largely been buried by the desert.
And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
So, the parents, particularly Dad, are leading with their noses, not their brains. And perhaps it's here, more than just the greedy moment of actually devouring the food, where we see how animalistic and pig-like he is. I mean, Dad had earlier commented that this place is completely deserted. It now clearly isn't if there's food, but he doesn't care to question that. You know, it takes Chihiro to ask the important question,
where is everybody?
Or, put differently, what's going on here? None of this makes sense. Why would there be a ton of food cooking in an abandoned theme park that's completely deserted? This isn't right. But like I said, her parents aren't leading with their brains, so they don't care to question anything. That's the biggest cause of their downfall, really. And Dad then spots the food and literally runs after it. I like the framing of this shot as well. You've got the space narrowing between these two restaurants like a thin alley, most of which is shaded. Dad's already entered and disappeared out of shot, Mum's leaning in, but Chihiro doesn't trust this thin alley. She stays where the surroundings are more open, where there's sunlight instead of crawling in under the shade. You've also got this arch positioned perfectly over the alley, giving this the sense of being like another tunnel, another transition further into the spirit world, or, you know, perhaps into being pigs. And Chihiro does enter the alley, to be fair. She's currently in a state of conflict between doing what she thinks and doing what her parents think. One of her developments across this film will be to learn to think for herself, just as we must all learn to separate ourselves from the brains of our parents and teachers and idols and anyone else we look up to. She's starting to show that conflict now, so she does draw in close, but she won't enter the restaurant. You know, she's coming close to following her parents, but not quite, and she's voicing her opinions, but still voicing them close enough to make sure her parents can hear. And she won't quite act for herself so much as attempt to persuade her parents to do what she wants. Not quite the same as them, but not quite separate either.
Don't worry, honey. We can pay the bill when they get back.
Which is a massive assumption, by the way. I mean, why would you assume this food is for customers? There's no one else here. Why would they have put out so much food if there's no one about to buy it? I mean, maybe you'd think it's set up specifically for someone else who's having a feast or something and they've ordered it in, it's prepared, something like that. Surely you wouldn't just assume, oh, well, we can have this food. It's not just greed they show in their eating, but also arrogance and self-entitlement, summed up best by the line,
"Don't worry, you've got Daddy here. He's got credit cards and cash."
Meaning, I can do what the fuck I like because I'm rich. I mean, think of how much crime and corruption and all of that stuff can come out of people who think like that in the real world. And you see a lot in Chihiro's expression here. First, she fearfully shouts,
Come on, you guys! You can!
Then, realizing they're not listening, she just sighs, frowns, and walks away. I mean, remember literally 10 seconds ago, I hope you can, remember when I said Chihiro is slowly beginning to think for herself? Well, now she starts to act for herself. She realises that if she and her parents don't agree, she doesn't have to stand there sulking, hoping they'll do what she wants if she whines enough. You know, instead she can go off and do her own thing independently. This is the bird leaving its nest in a way. And in that frown and disappointed sigh too, you know, there comes that time in all of our lives where we go from little kids who think the world of our parents, you know, who think they're practically the smartest people in existence, gods among us, to then realising, you know, actually they're pretty flawed individuals. And Chihiro seems to be realising that kind of thing here. These are my parents, gorging away like dumb pigs. So, slowly, carefully, Chihiro starts to explore the surroundings for herself, paying attention to the world around her in ways her parents haven't. And it's kind of just a nice calm moment where you can feel her reflecting here. And then she comes to the bathhouse, the highest point of this town, you know, like it's the end, the final destination for everyone. And it makes sense as the highest point, partly because it's Nujabes who practically runs this town, and therefore the bathhouse is in some ways her grand palace, so it makes sense to be above everything as a show of wealth. But it also makes sense geographically because the course of this film sets out Chihiro's journey upwards. You know, up to the bathhouse first, then from the boiler room at the bottom up through the levels of society, from being lowly scum to good worker to well respected and admired by everyone in the community, reaching Nujabes' office, you know, beyond her brief trip there when she gets the job. And then I guess the third act is her finally coming out of the bathhouse down back to the human world. And so in that sense, Chihiro's journey is kind of gradually up the social ladder, the career ladder, until getting near the top and then breaking away and returning home. Anyway, here she reaches, I guess, the final transition into this spirit world and the strange new society, the bridge. She gets halfway across it before Haku appears and tries to stop her. He tries to save her and send her back, but it's too late now. She's already started crossing the bridge, and as we'll quickly discover, there's no going back. There's a nice contrast between Haku and Chihiro anyway. He's in traditional clothing where she's in modern clothing. And I could also talk about the use of colour, Haku's association with blue and Chihiro's with pink throughout the course of this film, but I'm going to come to that in a later video because there's a lot of other points to draw in and say about colour in this film. But he's shocked to see Chihiro, either because it's shocking to see a human here, or because he's shocked to see Chihiro specifically, someone he later explains he has known all her life.
I've known you since you were very small.
He firmly tells her to leave, which Chihiro half sees as forceful and hostile, but he says, "I'll distract them." And you could say this is the first act of kindness in the film. I mean, maybe he has other motives to helping her, but still, kindness will be a theme to talk about a lot in future episodes on this film. So it's worth marking the very first kind act we see. Okay, we now see it quickly change from midday to midnight, and things get completely flipped on their heads. She tries to get her parents, who are now very much pigs. It leaves her frozen with fear, as well as a level of disgust in her expression. You know, as much as she loves her parents, she's also partly repulsed by what they've become. And she runs without any real thought or direction. She just runs and screams, "Mommy!" I think anyone who can ever remember getting lost in a busy place as a kid can empathise with this here. You know, all the strangers do feel like silhouettes in that situation. Everything feels terrifying as a kid. I can remember getting lost from my parents like that in a busy street and calling for them, and it's very painful how little a shit anyone gives. You know, none of the packed surrounding people paid the slightest bit of interest to me as a little kid shouting for my mum in that situation. Just like here, they don't give a shit about Chihiro. I don't think that's what the silhouettes are intending to represent, but it is fitting, that's all I want to say there. Anyway, she comes to some sense and runs towards the river, trying to get back. However, we see water dribbling out of the frog statue, and I assume this frog is linked to the frog we see later in the film. A quick bit of googling suggests the word frog in Japanese means return, and that they symbolise good fortune in things returning. Ironically, of course, Chihiro can't return. There is water now, and the clock house seems miles away. beyond reach. There is no returning from the spirit world yet. She has her journey, her quest to complete, even if she doesn't know what the quest is. You know, in very Dante divine comedy terms, you have to descend deep into hell, then up through purgatory before she can reach heaven. Obviously not in a Christian sense, that's just the example of Dante, but she'll have to dive further into this spirit world before she can come back up to the real world as a changed or maybe even enlightened being. I mean, we can't forget the fact that this film is now, in a very clear sense, a spiritual journey. It's in the spirit world, it's all taking place. She literally travels through the spirit world so that she can then return to real life as a changed person. And I was going to keep going for this video, but it feels like we've sort of come to a good place to stop now, with this shot across the water to the clock house. It's a beautiful one, and it's a strange moment of calm amidst this total panic of running and screaming that we've just had. And the music is calmer, but also a bit bizarre, confusing sounding music somehow, because this is a moment of confusion for Chihiro. She's going to have to stop and face the facts, you know, come to some sort of conclusion about what the fuck is going on here, what's happened to her parents, what's any of this. And she blinks to think about it and then comes to the conclusion that
I'm dreaming!
Which, you know, true or not, changes nothing. She is still stuck here. But I said I'd stop for this video now with Chihiro looking out across the water at the life she yearns for beyond it. You know, just as she'd previously been yearning for her life with Lily, she's stuck here now, and as she'll quickly learn, she's going to have to make the best of that.
There you go. You're all better. See for yourself.
Last time we left off 13 minutes into the film with me speaking about this beautiful shot here, and one of the things I didn't mention about it before is that it highlights there is a whole other town the other side of the river. I mean, they say that one of the ways to make a fantasy world feel expansive is to set it in largely one confined space, like the bathhouse or Hogwarts or whatever, but then just show small glimpses of the world beyond, just enough to tease you with something much more, enough to get your imagination flowing on its own, like here. Because we did see what that side of the river looked like in the waking real world, but we don't know anything more about the spirit world over there, beyond this shot and the figures we see come out of the boat. But anyway, let's just get to analysing, shall we? So the spaces surrounding Chihiro are dark and vast in these next few shots, which amplifies her loneliness here. All the light is currently in the distance. I like the little puddle around her feet though, like she's on her own little island here. We really see Chihiro's vulnerability in this next sequence of the film because she is alone now. She's without her parents for probably the first time in 10 years of living. Sure, she had a bit of a moment before of her trying to find her independence beyond them, but that was simple exploring, you know, she still knew where her parents were and that she could walk back to them. Now, however, she is cut off completely, like a baby duck without its mother. She is hopelessly vulnerable without them here, and if it wasn't for Haku, who will shortly come to her aid, God knows what might have happened to her in this world. Without Haku's help, would she have literally faded away? So she sits there trying to wake up while this odd boat draws nearer and the bizarre music gets louder. With its approach, the darkness draws back and is replaced by these reds and yellow colours. The guests on the boat get off and they make their way towards the bathhouse, and Chihiro runs off in fear. I suggested the darkness showed her loneliness, but you could also see it differently, and I wanted to present both options because, you know, all this stuff I say might not be right, it's just my thoughts. Because you could say the darkness in this sequence represents Chihiro's attempts to hide from the reality playing out before her eyes, in a kind of, if I can't see all this nightmarish stuff, then it's not real approach, hence sinking down and closing her eyes, but she can't hide from it. She has to face it. The boat and light draw nearer, exposing this bizarre dream to her. Even in holding up her hand, she can still see this weird dream right through them. And so, not wanting to face all this, she runs off back into the dark in an attempt to hide from it elsewhere. And before we move on, two more things. First is the fact that the music is completely at odds with Chihiro's emotions right now. This incredibly vulnerable moment for her, and the music distances us with something a bit more fun and festive. Is that also a sign of this spirit world drowning out her attempt to hide, not even giving her space and time to feel terrified? Or is it confirming how lonely she is, that no one cares about her terror right now? Not even us as an audience, we can't hear it. This strange world just carries on just the same, despite the fact she feels like she's falling apart. It's worth talking about the idea of disappearing as a loss of identity. I talked a bit in the first video about how identity is a big theme in Spirited Away. If you think about the overall plot of the film, it is in some ways about a girl who goes out into this strange world, gets a job, does well at her job, then leaves. You know, obviously there's many more things going on, but you get my point. On one level, this film captures what it feels like to leave school and enter the adult world of work. Suddenly you're independent from your parents. Suddenly you're thrown out into this alien world that you don't quite feel prepared for, full of lots of people with different aims and motives and tendencies, and somehow you're supposed to carve out your own place in this world. How do you do that? I mean, that's a big part of identity. What is your place in this world and how do you find it? On many levels, this film is a fantastical representation of what an alien world it can feel like when you're forced out into the world of work. And so, this links to the idea of disappearing, because who is Chihiro anymore? Her identity was this lazy, mopey daughter of her two parents, friend of Lily. But she doesn't have Lily anymore, nor even her parents, so who is she? If we think about it in terms of the literal practical rules of this world, the reason Chihiro is disappearing is because she's not really part of the spirit world. She's a human, and so it's not until she starts to eat food from this world that she takes on a physical form here and that her human smell goes away. Can we look at that as a point about cultural integration? Eating the food, joining in with the customs of this other world? Maybe. Maybe you find that a stretch, I don't know, but if you're from one culture the other side of the world and you suddenly have to move or are forced to move to a completely different country, a place where your culture doesn't have its place, where everyone does feel a bit alien and you don't fully understand everything yet, maybe it would feel like you're disappearing. But let me just suggest it this way. Those spirits coming in off the boat slowly fade into existence because they belong here. Chihiro doesn't belong, so she fades out. Now there's a scene change and we briefly take up a Haku's perspective as he searches for her. I like the positioning in this shot. Chihiro down in the corner trying to hide in the dark, whilst the spirits and all the bright lights float up the hill just above her. She's separated from them, literally on a different level. She's way down there, broken, while the rest of the world carries on totally oblivious. Apart from Haku, obviously. At first, Chihiro's too afraid to trust him, but she's also too afraid and weak to really fight back. And then the second she realises he is helping her, she clings to him, totally dependent the way she had been clinging to her parents earlier. And it's a touching moment when their hands touch as well, excuse the pun. She's eaten the food, and to prove she's fading back into physical form, Haku holds out his hand for her to touch. It's a nice moment to confirm that she isn't disappearing, but it's also a nice to show the level of connection now that is established between them. Chihiro is still totally helpless and panicked and everything though. Like I said, she clings to him, but he has the sense to know this isn't the right moment to panic her even more.
Where are my mom and dad? They didn't really turn into pigs, did they?
She asks, and he doesn't worry her with the truth. Nor does he lie though, he just says,
You can't see them now, but you will.
Anyway, now we get a shot of Yubaba scouring the sky looking for Chihiro. She doesn't see Chihiro, but she probably spots Haku, hence why she summons him to her office not long after this. Metaphorically, it's a good way to introduce the main antagonist anyway, as someone who is always watching. That's what we learn of her here. Chihiro can't stand up until she takes a breath, and Haku casts a spell on her legs. I see that as a moment to stop her panicking, essentially. You know, fear causes fight, flight or freeze. Chihiro is stuck in freeze, but he helps her spring into action, and they fly incredibly quickly. Through an alley, through a storeroom with gigantic food, through a pig pen which understandably worries her, and then to the bridge. And this is a nice establishing shot at the bathhouse. I don't think I've spoken about establishing shots yet. Establishing shots are used very well throughout this film to help us get a clear picture of the geography of this place. You know, by the end of the film we kind of know the layout off by heart of the bathhouse. The pale reds of the wall look like a deep purple, and what we hear are drums. Nice moment here with Chihiro as well. She's still yet to really find her rich inner resources. She's still very scared and lost, so to reflect that, we see Haku open the gate for her. He leans over while she's hidden behind, apart from her feet and the top of her head. She keeps her arms up close to her chest, making her seem doubly small and vulnerable, and then clings straight to Haku once he's closed the gate for her. Now I'm going to make a quick point about gender because I don't want people to get the wrong idea about this sort of stuff that will be coming up in the next sequence of the film. You could argue this is all a very weak, scared girl wholly dependent on a brave, strong male like a damsel in distress with her knight in shining armour. That's not this film at all though. It's true to say Chihiro is a very scared and vulnerable girl who is totally dependent on Haku right now, yes, but of course she is. You know, she's 10 years old and her parents just got turned into pigs. What 10-year-old wouldn't need someone to cling to? And Haku, on the other hand, isn't really a brave, strong knight in shining armour. We'll quickly discover he's a young boy that's been turned very cold and almost robotic at times. I spoke in the second episode of this about the need to grow up without losing the inner child completely, without losing your innocence. Haku has lost his inner child. The cruel world and slavery under Yubaba has torn it from him. He's supposed to be a boy and yet his heart has turned to stone. This is why he relies on Chihiro even now, because her heart hasn't turned to stone. She's a warm, open, compassionate, innocent person. That warmth feeds him just as her warmth feeds everyone else she encounters in this film. Whether he realises it or not, Haku needs to protect Chihiro because it's her warmth that will help him rediscover his own. Turn his heart back from stone, so to speak. He needs to save her from suffering the same destruction he suffered in this cruel world, precisely because she is what will save him. So, no, this isn't a story of brave male saving weak female. It's a story of two children who save each other. Anyway, the spell here goes that if Chihiro can cross the entire bridge without breathing, she'll be invisible to the spirits. And there's a lot of classical myths and poems and stories that have a similar setup to this. The one that springs to my mind right now is the story of Orpheus, who convinces Hades to let him bring back his lover Eurydice from the underworld on one condition. He doesn't look behind the entire way travelling back from the underworld to Earth. And inevitably he fails because he gets to a point and he realises he can't hear his lover's footsteps behind him anymore. So without thinking he instinctively looks back in fear and that's it over. Ultimately he fails because he's doomed to fail. You can't bring the dead back to life basically, that's the way the world works. Try as he might, he would always fail. And so similarly I think Chihiro was always doomed to fail this trial. Problem is, she's not actually a spirit, she's human. You see, having to hold her breath makes sense. Firstly because with the various mentions of humans smelling funny in comparison to the spirit, and by holding her breath she can sort of hold the funny smell that would come from her mouth. But more so, breath is the obvious symbol of life. Breath is the thing that living stuff does, so in crossing the bridge he has to effectively stop the thing of life itself, to become like the dead, like an actual spirit, but of course she isn't one. She's human, so she fails. And if you want me to link this back to all that spiel I made about identity, you can't just hide who you truly are. The frog probably makes Chihiro gasp because it's surprising at this moment in time to see a talking frog run at you. She hasn't gotten used to the weirdness of this place yet, so maybe you can call that culture shock? What you can definitely say is that it shows Chihiro is clearly an outsider. Like I was saying, she was doomed to fail this test because she's human, not a spirit. Perhaps she's doomed to fail because she's an outsider. You know, she can try and hold her breath and pretend like she's part of this culture, but her difference, her unfamiliarity with this place naturally reveals itself. So yeah, she fails to cross border patrol, so Haku has to magic their way forwards. He does save her here, and they charge through a couple of Marilyn Monroes, through a tiny hole in the wall, and then end up in the garden. And this is long enough for one episode now, so I'll end on one final point. Chihiro apologises for taking a breath and failing, but Haku says,
"No, Chihiro, you did very well."
Possibly you could say that's pandering to her, or possibly you could say he's kind of aware that she was always doomed to fail, and that she did well to get as far as she did, right near the end before the frog stopped her. She is human, try as she might, she can't hide that fact completely. So that's me done for now. Obviously I want to continue this series because it's something I'm passionate about, but Studio Ghibli are making it very difficult, so let me know if it is something you're still interested in me doing. Other than that, yeah, like, comment, subscribe if you're new. I'm doing more of this, I do other stuff as well, and hopefully see you next time.